As we go on about our days, we walk past countless people, not knowing anything about them. Some people smile and hold open doors. Some people strike up conversations and restore our faith in humanity. And some people give you dark vibes that you can't explain. And it's possible you encountered someone like the people in these stories. Enjoy. I had just moved into my first apartment and was still in the process of moving in. The door that led into my apartment locks itself automatically when closed. So I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone with my boyfriend. I returned to my apartment, sat on the bed while opening the mail while using the phone. Dropped the phone on the floor, and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. That's when I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still, with his back toward me and his head to his chest, so I couldn't see his face. He didn't see me. Trying to be rational with so many thoughts rushing through my head, I picked up my phone and said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just going to take a shower and call you back." The bathroom was right by my bed, so I hastily walked in, quietly locked the door, turned the shower on, and jumped out my window. My apartment is on the first floor. Then I called the police. They told me to wait nearby, but to go across the street and see if anyone comes out the door to the apartment complex. This was during the summer and it was still light out. Placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. Called my boyfriend, and he got to me just before the police did. I gave them my keys and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin and tired-looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't even try to get away. The policeman that had stood beside me and comforted me while the police searched through my house told me that the man stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives, waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept in my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under the bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be homeless and was placed into a mental hospital. My boyfriend moved in the very next day. In 1975, my dad was 11 years old and living in Leeds with his mother and stepfather. And for some pocket money, he would do a paper round every morning, extremely early. He left the house in the dark as it was October, went to collect papers, and set off to take his usual route through some playing fields. Essentially, it was a public park, but not a very well-kept one. But this morning was a particularly dark and gloomy one, and as he approached the cut-through he usually took, there seemed to be something off about it. So much so that it genuinely freaked him out just to be there. He decided to take his time and go the long way around, just to avoid the park, and thought nothing of it for the rest of the morning. When he got to school after his paper round, everyone was freaking out. Upon asking his friends what was going on, they told him that a woman had been murdered with a hammer and stabbed in the neck earlier that morning, in the same playing fields that he decided not to go through, and on the same pathway too. Probably just a major coincidence, but a very lucky one at that, because the time he was on his round was the apparent time the crime was happening. This turned out to be the first of 13 gruesome murders committed by the notorious Peter Sutcliffe, also known as the Yorkshire Ripper. This story takes place in 1977 The cast of characters includes my mom, my dad, and my brother, and of course, the serial killer. My brother was little at the time and had been at a friend's house. I don't remember what the occasion was, but my parents were picking him up. It was late at night, winter. My parents pick up my brother, load him into the car, and start driving home. As they're leaving the neighborhood to get to the main road, they see a man come out of the woods with a shotgun and get into his van on the side of the road. Now, the area I grew up in was suburban, but the folks can be rather redneck. So seeing someone come out of the woods with a shotgun is worrisome, but it usually just means they were a poacher. Dad just keeps on driving. The man gets into his car and follows my parents onto the main road. Still nothing to be worried about. They make a few turns on the way home, and it becomes increasingly obvious that the van was following them. They pull into the housing plan we lived in, which was mostly new construction. The van pulls into the plan behind them. At the time, our house was the only finished, occupied house on our little cul-de-sac. The streetlights hadn't even been turned on yet. Pitch black, winter, cold, isolated. The van pulls into our driveway behind my dad. Dad gets out of the car, sends my mom and brother into the house, and tells them to lock the door. He waits till they get inside. Then he walks up to the van, stands at the nose of it, and just stares at the man inside. Waits. No questions, no bravado, nothing. He just stands there and waits, intimidatingly. Now, what you need to know about my father at the time: he had a full-ride scholarship for football in college, dropped out, and decided it would be fun to join the military and volunteer to go to Vietnam instead, because he was bored. Spent a year on a god-forsaken island at a ranger camp. He is an intimidating man, always has been. Without being overly tall or large, he has a presence. You just don't want to fuck with him. He's now much older and somewhat overweight, but in 1977, he must have been something. Because without any words exchanged, the man put his van into reverse and just drove away. The story doesn't end there, though. The next morning, it was all over the news. A man had been murdered the night before in the housing plan my parents picked my brother up from, just a street away. He had been shot through his living room window with a shotgun. Died on the floor while the wife tried to flee. Kids asleep upstairs. The wife leads the man through the woods on a chase. They find her body a few hours later in the woods. The same area where my family saw the man come out. Turns out it was Edward Surratt, the serial killer. My dad used to tell me the story, although I didn't know all the grisly details until I was much older. As one of those listen to your gut kind of lessons. The setting is small-town Indiana, early to mid-70s. My dad is middle school, early high school aged. His house was about 6 or 7 blocks from the school, so when weather was nice, he would just walk home from school. One day on his walk home, he noticed a guy in a van driving by him slowly. A bit strange, but he thought nothing of it. Then it happened again and again. Eventually, the guy driving the van started yelling things at him, usually asking him to buy drugs. This is when my dad recognized the guy as Roger. Roger was about 9 years older than my dad, but my dad was friends with one of Roger's relatives, so he knew who he was. Anyway, the cycle of Roger following my dad for blocks as he walked home, asking him to buy drugs, continued for who knows how long. My dad always got this gut feeling that something was deeply off about Roger. He was so afraid that when Roger yelled, he wouldn't even respond. He would just stare at the ground until he reached his house. These walks must have seemed like they took forever. My dad was one of those kids who seemed to grow a foot taller over one summer, so he isn't sure if that's why Roger stopped, or if he just moved on. Either way, he was just glad when it stopped. Fast forward to Valentine's Day 1977. Different town, still small and remote. A woman is at home with her son and 3 stepsons. Roger and 3 other men break into her home with shotguns and force her and her boys to lie face down on the floor. Roger and the gang threaten and taunt them for hours before shooting them one by one. One of the shots partially blew off the wig that the mother was wearing. Roger thought her skull had blown off, and, assuming she was dead, stopped shooting her. She survived, later describing a horrible noise as she lay there, then realizing that what she was hearing was the blood draining from her son and stepsons. She described it as almost like a waterfall. Roger and his gang got away with a whopping $40, but it was never about robbery. It was about the thrill of taking human lives. The mother eventually identified Roger and the 3 other men as the perpetrators, with Roger being the ringleader. Indiana didn't have the death penalty at the time, so each man was sentenced to multiple life sentences. Roger recently died in prison. I know it's unlikely that my dad would have been murdered by Roger had he gotten into the van or bought drugs from him. But the fact that he was so close so often to someone who was capable of doing something like that is unsettling. Alright, so this isn't paranormal. There's no demons or ghosts or women with oranges in this. It's just a really weird thing going on with a weird kid in my apartment building. This has continued to freak me out to a ridiculous point. So I live in this apartment complex in Parksville, British Columbia. It's a small town on Vancouver Island. The building is fairly nice, mostly families and older people. I'm probably the youngest person living here on their own. Each floor has 4 apartments. Mine is in the back of the building, on the 2nd floor. Now, this has to do with my peephole. I noticed pretty early on that the peepholes in this building were like crazy wide angle. So when you look through it, you can see the entire floor. Call me paranoid, but anytime I go out to the kitchen I get a drink at night, I always look through the peephole. I've always done this anywhere that I've lived. I don't know. I guess it makes me feel more aware of what's going on. Just in case there's an evil ghost murderer with oranges waiting for me, I'll have a heads up. The people who live directly across from me, middle-aged guy and his wife, not sure who lives next to me, but the apartment next to the middle-aged couple is a woman and her little girl. I'm bad at judging ages, but I guess she's around 10. One night I looked through my peephole, and to my surprise, the little girl is standing outside of her door, just standing there with her back to it, in a nightgown, just standing there. I find it really weird considering it was 2 a.m., but there she was, just standing there. I have considered opening the door and asking if she was okay, but then she opened the door and went back into her apartment. After that, I checked the peephole more frequently, and soon enough, a few days later, the same thing. This time it was a little earlier, around 12:30. She was just standing outside her door, plain as could be. She looked around a bit and then went back inside. The very next day I looked out my peephole, and she's standing in front of my door. Not like up against it. She's in the middle of the hall, but she's facing my door. It scared the crap out of me. So I'm just standing there watching this creepy little kid standing in front of my door, 2 a.m. Then she just went back to her apartment. She's done this 3 more times now. Just standing there, facing my door, middle of the night. I'm too much of a chicken to speak up and say anything. But Why is this little girl staring at my door in the middle of the night? When we lived in California, we weren't poor, but we would be lost if a paycheck didn't come in. Because of this, we went to the laundromat once a week. Remembering back on it, it seems like a place where you could go film a B-rate slasher film. But that wasn't my concern. What had my attention was not the humming, the buzzing of the washing machines or dryers, or the unnatural white light coming from the fluorescent bulbs. It was the arcade corner. Once a month, my mom would give me $1 and let me go duke it out with a metal slug. After getting my butt handed to me by the forces of evil, I asked my mom if she had any extra quarters, which she replies, "Do you think someone is going to give you free money?" I angrily go back and just watch the flashing screens of Marco destroying everything. Shortly, a man shows up. I remember him clearly because he was wearing an old army BDU jacket and was well built, but he had eyeliner and hoop earrings on. The whole time he had this menacing grin that almost rivaled that of the Joker. I avoided eye contact and repeated in my head, "Stranger danger," several times. He then whispered to me, "Want another quarter?" At that moment, my head turned to him and said, "Yes, please," came out before I could even respond. I started destroying evil, and when I would die, he would put in another quarter. He put his hand on my shoulder and started massaging it. Before anything else escalated, my mother saw the man groping my shoulder and immediately dragged me by the ear, saying I forgot to take out the crayons from my pockets and they ruined a pair of jeans. I guess she didn't want to cause a scene since we were the only people there with Sergeant Drag. I've never been a girl who was scared easily. I routinely watched crime shows, horror movies, etc. However, a night in March 2005 changed all that for me. I was attending college for music in 2005 and had recently seen one of my favorite violinists. Inspired, I had asked a pianist friend to accompany me while I played a piece. Looking back, it wasn't smart on our part to go at night to the college music practice rooms, which are nearly soundproof and separated from the rest of the building. I figured since it was across the street from the campus police headquarters, we'd be okay. I was wrong. My friend and I are in a practice room for about 15 minutes when she looks up at me and says, "Don't freak out, but there's a guy with a mask on behind you." Now this is college. There are plenty of stupid people doing stupid things here. When I turned around, I realized this was something much more sinister. There, crouched on the other side of the practice room's glass door, is a thin guy, about 5'7", 5'8", wearing a blonde curly wig, the Groucho Marx glasses, nose combo thing, a hideous shirt, just a personal judgment, and the creepiest smile I've ever seen. That's right. No pants or underwear, just his small penis out. When I turn around, he waves and then enters this tiny practice room. My friend and I try to remain calm because we honestly don't know what to do. This guy tries to strike up small talk with us and mentions he heard me talking about my favorite violinist. Apparently, he's been standing outside the practice room the entire time. Knows our names, where I went that day, where my hometown is, my guy problems, etc. This went on for a while, but as soon as we could, we booked it out of there. He had been blocking the door most of the time. As we're leaving, he says, "Let's do it again," and then he says my name. Of course, we go to the campus PD immediately, and they think it's pretty funny. The next day, I'm sitting in choir when the dean comes in and says, "Hey, a friend of your cousin stopped by today. He said he wanted to give you some CDs of my favorite violinist. He asked for the girl who plays violin with your first name, so I assumed it was you. I tell him what happened, and he's furious because the campus security didn't do anything. That's when the stalking began. He soon was clever enough not to go by the music office again, but my dorm neighbors would tell me a guy was looking for me to give me some kind of gift. One time, a stack of CDs with various violinists were sitting at my assigned seat for choir. Another time, they were outside my door. All the while, the campus security did nothing. Some people even suggested I should enjoy the attention. Things eventually died down when I finally moved off campus, and it stopped altogether when I moved away from college. Until 2 years ago, when I moved back to the same town. The first week back, I received a direct message on Twitter saying, "Glad you're back. I've missed you. Let's get together and listen to our favorite violinist." I reported it to the real police, who haven't caught the person to my knowledge. All they knew is the address came from somewhere other than my city. Part of me is still waiting for the knock on the door, or a present left at my work or home. Due to illness on both sides of my family, I've always lived with either my grandmother or her daughter, my aunt. There have been several times before my grandmother's passing that my aunt had to live with us to take care of her and help around the house. I must have been around 6 or 7, and my aunt was living with us along with her daughter, who was 3 years older than I. I don't fully remember the layout of the house, but I know that I eventually ended up in a room that had to be walked through to get to the bathroom. At the time, my aunt had been in a pretty serious long-term relationship with a guy whose last name was Walters, and he'd come over pretty frequently. I remember him being well-liked. One night, I believe I was playing a video game in our living room when I hear a lot of commotion coming from the stairs that led to the second floor. What had happened was that Waters was caught by my grandfather in my room. My grandmother was in the shower, and apparently Walters had pulled aside my dresser, which was against a wall shared by the bathroom, and poked a hole through so he could watch people while they were showering. My grandfather caught him and literally threw him down the stairs, and I never saw him again. But there's literally no telling how long this was going on and who all he was watching. Last year I had my 21st birthday. Along with celebrating with my friends, my boyfriend's mom wanted to take me out too, so his mom went ahead and reserved a table at a bar downtown for Saturday night. Saturday night comes and there's major traffic, but it's always packed downtown on weekends, so this was expected. His mom and I park in a toll parking lot, and we have to walk about 5 blocks to the bar, where we're going to meet my boyfriend and everyone else. So we start walking, and arrive at a crosswalk we have to wait at. There's maybe 8 other people standing at this crosswalk with us, and I'm just patiently standing there minding my own business, when suddenly I noticed this girl standing next to me. She startled me, to be honest. 1, because she seemed to appear out of thin air, and 2, because of how close she was standing next to me. It almost felt as if she was trying to huddle into me. Like, you know, when a little kid is shy and will try to hide behind their parents? That's how close she was. Except she was leaning into me and had her shoulders hunched over. Her hair was black and long, at least to her waist. She had on a long striped dress that went down to her ankles, a leather jacket and sandals. She looked to be around my age, but she had dark tan skin and black eyes. Her attire was normal, but she didn't act normal. She was being really weird and kept plugging her nose, as if she was smelling something bad. She kept looking around, as if she expected something to pop out and grab her. To be honest, she was acting like a scared animal, but her demeanor was cold. Her eyes felt dead and empty, and her face held no emotion. Not liking how close she had gotten to me, I took a few steps to the side. She stepped towards me and got as close as she was the first time. I sort of thought it was weird, but gave the situation the benefit of the doubt. The crosswalk light turned green right after she came close to me, so I figured I didn't have to deal with her because we would be walking our separate ways, right? Wrong. She walked across the street and the first few blocks with me, staying the same closeness she was before, no matter how I moved away from her. No matter how many times she almost got lost in the crowd of people, she would then scurry right up next to me again, all the while plugging her nose and looking around everywhere. My boyfriend's mom at this point confronted the girl saying, "Do you need something? Are you okay or what?" To which the girl responded, "It's not safe." And after she said that, she slowly lifted her head, cocked her head slightly, and looked me dead in the fucking eyes. Her mouth quivered. My boyfriend's mom and I just looked at each other like, what the fuck? At that point, I wanted to get away from this weirdo, and it was bad enough that she wouldn't stop invading my space and following me, but now she's saying this crazy stuff. My boyfriend's mom pulls me to her and whispers to me in my ear, "Walk faster and don't look at her. I want to see if she's following us." So that's exactly what I did. And guess what? She follows us all the way to the bar, despite my boyfriend's mom telling her to please stop getting so close to us. She responded with, "I want to stay with you guys." Despite taking unnecessary turns to see if she would follow us, she would. I was freaking out internally all the way there. We finally get to the bar, whip out our IDs as quickly as we can so we can get inside and get away from the freak following us. Then she followed us inside and sat at our table. She sits at the furthest side of the table, then starts to scoot herself over. But she only moves over when we look away. You turn your head and boom, she's managed to hop over one seat closer. And she's just staring the whole time with this crazy blank expression on her face. My boyfriend's mom has had it at this point and gets up to tell the bodyguard to make her leave. The bodyguard comes, tells the girl she has to go, and she actually tries to argue with him. I didn't catch the whole conversation over the loud music, but I caught the girl asking him why she had to leave and saying that she can sit wherever she wants. She became very aggressive once he told her that this table was reserved for us and our group, and that she was not part of it. She got fussy and looked at me with malice before she got up and stormed out. But she didn't leave right away. She stood outside, looking in at me through the open patio at the front of the bar. She wasn't moving and seemed to care less and less about the hustle and bustle of the people around her. She did this for about 15 minutes before she finally left to go God knows where. There was just this really bad, dark feeling emanating from her. She made me nervous for some reason, and I just felt wrong. I mean, honestly, she was probably just a crackhead, but it was super creepy, and I hope I never see her again. Now I work at a sandwich shop. I was getting ready to close at 10 p.m. I'm pretty meticulous about closing on time because I'm usually ready to go home by then. It's 9:55 p.m. and the bell rings, letting me know that someone came in. I grumble a little because I'm tired and head to the front. This little boy, probably 7 or 8, is standing in front of the counter. He's wearing this old-fashioned tweed jacket and a red baseball cap. I say, "Hello, what can I do for you tonight?" like I usually do. He just stares at me like I grew a second head. I stare back, confused. "I have to use the restroom." he says, and runs back to where the restrooms are. I hear the door squeal open and slam shut. At this point, I'm a little aggravated because I'm getting ready to close, and I don't want to have to wait on this little brat whose parents couldn't even be bothered to come in with him. So I start to close. I turn off the open sign and head to the back to do some quick dishes, thinking I'll just lock the door behind the little boy when he leaves. I finish the dishes and start to put the food in the refrigerator. I'm starting to get pissed. All I have to do is put the food away, count the bread, count the drawer, finish all this stuff, and still no little boy. I put on my coat and get ready to leave, gathering receipts and such. I go to knock on the door of the boys' restroom. Hey, I'm closing. You need to leave. Nothing. Hey, kid, come on. Still nothing. If you don't at least answer me, I'm gonna open the door. The lock was broken, so I knew I would be able to open it. I stood there, worrying that maybe something happened to him. Kid? I jiggle the handle until it opens. I kind of cover my eyes because I didn't really want to see the little boy on the toilet. I expected him to scream, at the very least say something. All there was silence. I looked into the restroom, the size of a closet. There was no one. No sign of anything. The lid was still lifted from when I had cleaned it earlier. No trash in the bin. What the fuck? I checked the girls' restroom, the entire lobby. Nothing. Nowhere in the entire shop. There's absolutely no way that he left. It's impossible that he left. I've worked there long enough that doorbell is a Pavlovian response, and you can hear it clearly everywhere in the store. I went into work a little early the next morning to get my check. My close friend was there, and she and I talked for a little bit about her boyfriend and gossip and whatever. Then she says, "Dude, there was the creepiest little kid standing outside the front door this morning when I came in." We come in and leave from the back door. Really? Yeah, he was just standing there, staring in the window. But when I went to open the door, he ran off. What did he look like? I asked, trying to keep from freaking out. Boy, gray coat, red hat. Neither I nor anyone else has seen or heard about him since. My parents used to have a friend from high school who they have since told me they all thought was a little strange. We'll call him Rick. My mom said he was a really nice guy. Not red flag weird, just odd. They had vague knowledge of the abuse in his family, but at that time, abuse wasn't something people really talked about. It was considered personal family business. So I guess they just chalked his oddness up to childhood trauma or something. Their group of friends were all pretty close. Enough so that it wasn't weird when Rick would show up at our house just to hang out. My mom told me that sometimes if my dad wasn't home when he stopped by, he would just hang out with her and little baby me until he got back. The year they all graduated high school, a woman attending the university in our city went missing, and about a month later, her body was found. The police reported that the woman's body had probably been there a couple of weeks by the time it was found. Her killer was never caught. A few years later, when I was a month old, another female student of the university went missing. Our local police department still has her case open because she was never found. She was pronounced dead after being missing for about 10 years, at the request of her family. Around the time she had gone missing, I think there began to be some suspicions surrounding Rick within their social circle. No actual evidence that he might have been involved or anything, just more of a feeling they got, that something was going on with him, and they just found it a bit eerie. Seeing as it was at the same time this woman was missing, he had previously asked my dad if he could store a truck topper in their barn. My mom told me that she once went to look around out there just to be sure of what she never really said. She wasn't looking for anything specifically, but she just felt a need to inspect the area a bit. She didn't find anything strange or out of place. 18 months after that, a third woman was abducted. After being taken to a house in a tiny town outside our city, chained to a bed, she was then taken to a bridge over the river, hands and possibly feet still bound, and thrown in. She somehow swam to the riverbank and was able to call the police. She identified her abductor to the police, along with the house she was taken to. It was Rick. The police went to his house to arrest him, and as they were climbing the stairs, he shot and killed himself. During the investigation into the two prior disappearances, they discovered that he had taken off a week of work during the times that each of the two other women had gone missing. This took place when I was 11 or so, still in elementary school. This specific event took place after school one day, toward the end of the school year. My bus stop was at the very end of my very big neighborhood, and it was a good 15 minutes of winding down several roads to get home. I would always walk with a group of older kids that lived near my house. But this particular day, I got off the bus first, so I was way ahead of them. I was about 5 minutes into my walk when I noticed something. A man about 30 or so was walking behind me. I brushed it off as someone walking to the park or something. About 2 minutes later, I noticed he had gotten faster, which alarmed me. So I started walking faster. And the faster I got, the faster he got. I was almost on the third to last road I go down to get home when I noticed the guy was still there. As I turned to look at him, he starts sprinting at me. I turn and start running as fast as my short legs could go. He kept gaining ground. I hear something. Footsteps. A group of them. That's when I notice a group of high school kids walking toward the corner I was headed for. I decided if I got to them, it'd scare the man off, so I ran as fast as I possibly could. As I got about 10 feet away, the man stops running and basically throws himself into some bushes. I run up to the group of teenagers and explain to them what had happened. They looked around the general area for him, but he had fled. They walked with me until I was a street away from home, and when they left, I noticed a man walking down the street toward me. It wasn't until he was about 20 or 30 feet away that I recognized him as the same man from earlier. By that time, the group of teenagers was long gone, leaving me on my own again. As he got in touching distance, I bolted. I ran as fast as I could toward my house when I noticed he had started running after me, with some grin I can only describe as evil. I reached my house and ran to the front door, hoping it was unlocked so I wouldn't have to get my spare key from the pot next to the door. As I get to the door, I notice my dad's car coming down the road. I guess the man noticed too, because he immediately ran past me and my house as if he were on a run. I stood there shaking and crying until my dad pulled me up and promptly explained what happened. To this day, despite being in high school, I'm still not allowed to walk home. I still remember what the man looked like. His clothes, his grin, his facial hair. It haunts me. A few years ago, I went to London to attend college. During the time I stayed there, I had made friends, gotten a job as a bartender, and you know the works, just a typical college student. One day, one of my coworkers and her dear friend Gina decided to have a few people at her place after work. Her house was within walking distance of the bar we worked in, so we all decided to make a night out of it. It was around 2 a.m. or so. I thought it was about time to go home. Let me make it clear that I was not drunk. I was, however, exhausted since I had been working a 12-hour shift. Called the cab company that I normally call and requested a cab to pick me up at the bar, drive me back to my dorm. No problem, they'll be there in about 5 or 10 minutes. I walk to the bar and wait in the front for the cab to show up. Cab pulls up in front of me and calls over. You waiting for the cab? Yes, thank you. I hop in. My dorm is maybe a 5 or 7 minute drive away. No big deal. Would only cost me about £5 to get back. The whole way home, though, this cab driver is putting his hands all over me. I usually joke around with the cab drivers so as to avoid the awkward car drive. It's always harmless. But anytime I laughed and lifted my hands, he would try to hold my hand. Every so often, he would try to put his hand on my thigh, in which I would remove it and move slightly toward the door. At that moment, I get a phone call. Hello? Hi, this is Tony. I'm here to pick you up. Around that time, there seemed to be, what looked to be at least, a big issue with unmarked cabs picking up young women, raping them, and leaving them. There were even commercials about it, ads about it at bus stops. Needless to say, it was definitely something to be looked out for. So when I got that phone call, my heart dropped. I've already been picked up. I looked at the driver, and the whole time the driver is asking me to, give me the phone, let me talk to him. Give me the phone, let me talk to him. Give me the phone, let me talk to him. Luckily, the real cab driver on the phone was very kind and told me to listen to him carefully. If he takes me anywhere, to call him. I have his number now. What he was an unmarked cab. Recently, I guess, some people were able to obtain fake marks for their cab or something. Bear with me, this was quite a while ago, to make it appear like it was actually a marked cab. Either way, this guy was an unmarked cab, and had just stolen someone else's cab fare. I ended up being dropped off at my dorm. The driver asked me, how much do they usually charge? I said £2. He drove off without so much as a goodbye, never to be heard from again. Thank God. My dad left for a few months for a job in another country. So it was just my mom, my little sis who was a baby, and me, 5. I remember this vividly. My mom hated staying home without my dad. She said it didn't feel safe. The house itself was very secure, fully fenced, had 2 entrances, the kitchen and front entrance. Each entrance had 2 doors, internal door solid wood, and the external door solid iron. All of the windows in the house were plantation-style shutters. They open and close when you turn the little knob thingy. They were made out of some sort of steel and iron combo. I would sleep with my mom in her bed, and my little sister in the same room in her crib. My mom used to lock the door and push a dresser up against it. She was and is very paranoid. The night my dad left, we started hearing crinkling of leaves. We had large trees in the backyard and piles of leaves on the ground. My mom let out a scream and thought that it would scare off whoever it was. It didn't. We kept hearing the crinkling, and my mom kept screaming. The phone was in the living room. This was the early 90s. No cell phones. The house on the left was too far from us to hear her screams. The one on the right was an old couple who couldn't do anything for us. During this time in my country, you had to wait until morning to call the police station. And even then, these people didn't have a phone. We were trapped. I remember the absolute terror I felt. My teeth were chattering so bad I was worried I was going to crack them out of my skull. My mom tells me that was something that has always stayed with her, the sound of my teeth clacking. At one point, she opens the shutters a little to try to see if the person is still there. The light in the bedroom was on. A beam of light shines across this person's eyes. She recognized him immediately. It was one of my dad's acquaintances. She knew it was him because he has very distinct eyes, bright green and cat-like. She loses it, grabs a shoe and throws it really hard at the window, in the area where she saw him. This was a clog-type shoe against steel shutters. I cannot accurately describe how loud and jarring the sound was. This was the longest night of my life, and it went on for hours. This dude fumbling around in the dark trying to get into our house. My mom's guttural screams for help. We waited him out till dawn. It seemed my little sister actually went into shock. She was a really cranky baby who would cry at the slightest provocation. She did not cry once the entire night. I remember looking over at her as this was happening and standing in her crib, all big watery eyes and silent. The next morning my mom says, "Fuck this," and starts packing up all of our stuff. She says we're going to move in with Grandma until Dad comes home. On our way there, we take the bus, because my mom doesn't have a license. Guess who's on the bus? Crazy creeper guy. He just looked at her and smiled. Didn't say hello or anything, just smiled with a weird glint in his eye. To this day, my mom swears that this dude thought he was going to get another chance, possibly the following night. But my mom got us the fuck out of there. She was worried he was going to figure it out because we had luggage with us. He didn't. He didn't even know where my grandmother lived. Years later, when I talked to my mother about this, she told me point blank, had he gotten into the house, he was going to rape all of us. She says this dude used to look at me a lot when I rode my bike in the neighborhood, and he always eyed her and my baby sister. This encounter happened to a friend and a coworker of mine about 15 years ago in a suburb of Los Angeles. My friend, I'll call her Jody, lived with her parents and older brother in a house in a pretty nice neighborhood. They didn't really worry about crime, break-ins, etc. One night, though, at about 2 a.m., Jody was woken up by a loud knocking at the front door. She jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway, where her parents and brother were coming out of their rooms. The knocking, now a pounding, continued. "Stay here," said the father, and made his way toward the door. All of a sudden there came a muffled male shouting, "Help me! Help me!" Jody and her mom grabbed each other in fear, and her dad looked outside the peephole. "There's nobody there," he said. He looked out the front window, where you could see part of the front door and porch. He still didn't see anyone. He walked back toward his family when the loud knocking began again. This time more frantic. Again a voice shouted, "Help! Help me!" Jody's dad went to the phone and called 911, and while he was talking to the operator, her brother had walked up to the front of the house, the pounding still going on, getting faster and faster until it was now a constant banging. "Help me! Help me! Oh God, help me!" Jody was in tears by now, looked over at her brother who was standing in the family room, which was located to the left of the front door. His face was white. He made an arm gesture for them to join him. Jody, her mom and dad, who was off the phone by then, hurried into the family room, where they immediately realized why her brother's face had gone pale. The pounding and shouting was coming from underneath the family room floor. The police arrived minutes later, and it turned out that some guy in his 20s had gotten out of his mind on crack that night, and had somehow made his way into the opening of the crawl space under the house, located underneath the family room window. They never found out exactly what his intention was, but they assume he was trying to find his way into the house to rob it, but got disoriented because he was so high and freaked out, hence the pounding and shouting. I grew up in a city in Pakistan, and I would pretty much tag along everywhere with my dad. There was this one big grocery store we would always go to, and I'd just go to the candy aisle when he was picking out the boring stuff. I must have been around 11 then, but there was this guy who used to work there, I'm guessing late 20s, and every time I would come to the store I'd notice him staring at me, and then following me around the aisles. At first I ignored it, but then he started accidentally brushing past me. So the next few times I just stuck with my dad. But this guy would literally follow us around and wait till my dad got busy and I was alone. Anytime we made eye contact, this guy would give me this weird smile. I still get the creeps when I think about it. And he'd sing songs, increasing his volume when I refused to make eye contact with him. This kept going on for a while, until I stopped going to that store, unless I absolutely had to. One day I was reluctantly dragged there by my dad, and while we were there, he met some friend of his. They were chatting, etc. So he told me to go grab some chickpeas from the aisle and meet him at the counter. The minute I got to the aisle, the creepy man was there, and he was smiling in that way again. I said nothing and quickly grabbed the packet, but he was just standing in my way. The aisles of the store were very tiny, so I couldn't get out. And then he said, "I really like young girls," and started singing a song again, and I stood there frozen. Then he pinched my back and left the aisle whistling. When I was a teenager, 15 years old, I was on the phone with my boyfriend at the time and hanging out on the computer. The house I lived in at the time had giant windows on the first floor. I was in one of the rooms with the huge windows and had opened the drapes to let some light in. While talking to my boyfriend, I had this super eerie feeling that I was being watched, and I slowly turned toward the window and saw a man in tattered clothes with sweat dripping off every part of his body, pressed up against my window, with his hands cupped over his eyes, and gave me a horrifying smile. I immediately dropped the phone. I was on a phone with a cord, and ran into the next room and grabbed the cordless phone. I told my boyfriend what was happening, and I started crying, trying to remember if all of the doors were locked. The man had to crawl over a few bushes in order to get that close to the window, which made me feel like he didn't have the best of intentions. That's when the doorbell started ringing. I poked my head around the corner to see the front door, French doors with glass panels, and see the man trying to get in the house by opening the door. At this point, I'm absolutely freaking out. My boyfriend tells me to call my mom. My mom answers at work and told me to hide and call the police. I called the cops crying, and then noticed out of the corner of my eye from a window in the back of the house that the man is making circles around my house, looking for a way to get in. The dispatcher told me to get somewhere where he couldn't see me and get a weapon if I felt like it would make me more comfortable. I grabbed the long chef's knife and stood sobbing in a small gap between my back door and a hallway where I couldn't be seen through any windows. And then I remembered that a first floor window was unlocked, and I couldn't see or hear the man anymore. Eventually I hear a loud knock on the door, and slowly go to see that it's the cops. He asked me to come outside with him so he can look inside the house and make sure the man didn't find a way in. Right after we get outside, my boyfriend's stepdad pulls into my driveway. My boyfriend had called him to come and check on me. Boyfriend was out of town, and he lets me sit with him in his car while the policeman, gun drawn, check the house. The cop never found anything. No trace of the guy. Nothing. I was terrified and scared to stay home alone for quite some time after that. I still freak out when the doorbell rings and I'm not expecting anyone, and I'm terrified that I'll find someone else staring at me through the windows whenever I'm home alone. Back in the 60s, my dad worked as a guard at a prison near Miami. He described his most memorable experience to me recently. He says that there was one prisoner who was a lot like a younger Hannibal Lecter. Very calm, but very menacing. He always kept his cool no matter what, but there was something threatening about him. Well, one day, young Lecter was able to start a riot in his cell block purely by motivating the other prisoners into a frenzy. He didn't participate in the riot at all, but he got every other prisoner to start a fight in their cell. My dad and a few other guards were called down to the cell block to quiet them all down. He says that when he got down there, every prisoner was screaming and throwing themselves against the walls of their cells and shouting profanity and insults to the guards. That is, every prisoner except Lecter. He was the only one quiet on the entire block. My dad came up close to his cell, and this guy was standing near the back with his hands folded, staring my dad directly in the eye, and muttering a random sequence of numbers with a strange smile on his face. My dad stood there, trying to figure out what the numbers meant. Then it finally hit him. The prisoner was reciting my dad's home phone number on repeat. I'm sure you've encountered at least one person like this throughout your lives, and if you haven't yet, odds are you will at some point. That's not to say you should be scared to go out and live your lives. Be aware of your surroundings, pay attention, know how to defend yourselves. Fight dirty, duck and weave. The truth is you never know what someone's intentions are, so just be careful out there. Thanks for watching. See you next time.